Happy Sabbath. It's a pleasure to be here again with you this morning. And I'll be doing the health nugget myself. And these are the deadly 6. I think it says 5 in your brochure, but it's deadly 6 of things to avoid that are toxic or pro-inflammatory. And when I first came to an Adventist church, this is 22 years ago, I was down in California. I was studying with a pastor in Petaluma before I was baptized. And I went upstairs for the first time to their potluck. I'd never seen an Adventist potluck. I'd never seen an Adventist church before. And I went upstairs and I looked around. I had been reading Ministry of Healing on Counsels on Diets and Foods. And so I appreciated the prophet's view of food. And I had been a naturopath practicing and a chiropractic practicing for decades. And I knew the message from what I had been studying all my career. And I was grateful to see that the message came from the Lord. So I looked at the table and I said, and I sat down at one of those large round tables, and the pastor came and the elders came, and they were all flocking around a new person coming. You know, that's like bees to honey. And I looked at them, I said, do you guys have a prophet? They said, yeah, we do. I said, do you believe what she says? They said, absolutely. I said, so why are you eating this way? They couldn't answer it. When I was baptized, they had a very clean diet presented at the potluck. They realized what was possible. So I'd like to go over with you, and this is a 4-page handout that you can get, I think, at the back of the sanctuary, but it's the 4th page. Now, this 4-page handout I give to all my patients still, and I update it every so many years as more research comes in. So this is the latest handout, and it's about foods to avoid. Now, you know in Ellen White's writings about the 8 laws of health, one of them is abstemiousness. What does that mean? Avoid what's unhealthy, what doesn't work for you. And that was presented to Adam when he was told to eat of every fruit of the fruit of every tree of the garden, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Avoid that one. It was toxic and catastrophic. So the laws of health are as profound as the laws of the Decalogue. We read that last night in Ellen White's work. So these foods, so-called, will always create toxicity in the body and inflammation in the body. As we mentioned last night, inflammation is literally behind every pathology you will ever have, including cancer. And I see people eating their way to their grave with a fork. That's how they dig their grave, sadly. And we see people recovering when the diet begins to cleanse. Now, at the top of the list, I put animal proteins. These are filled with what's called arachidonic acids, and these are pro-inflammatory fatty acids even in the lean muscle mass of animal fats. It's not just the marbled fat, it's the lean muscle mass itself that contains arachidonic acid. And when we eat arachidonic acid, it's a pro-inflammatory trigger. You also have in the animal hormones that are germane to the animal and not for us. We take them on and they are stimulating for our bodies, especially the hormones that happen when an animal is being slaughtered. Cortisol goes rushing through the animal's body into their muscle, and we take that on and it becomes stimulating to us. What's even more significant is the effect it has on our temperament. It is that which drives cruelty in us, and that's in Spirit of Prophecy. And at the end of time, the 144,000 that is written in the Bible will not partake of animal flesh. Is that significant? That's not a rhetorical question. Is that significant? I'm asking, is that significant? Absolutely. So dairy, eggs, meat, fish, and fowl do not work in our bodies. They're toxic, they're pro-inflammatory, they're overstimulating, and they drive our temperament to lose sight of the righteousness of Christ. And they move us to being cruel. The next is refined carbs. Even Ellen White said, it's best to avoid sweets. And that's a quote I have from her. I'll give you that later today. Now, this includes anything that is sugar or becomes sugar, as in refined sugars. Not sugars found naturally in fruits, for example, but refined sugars, things that are removed from natural food and made into something that is separate from the food and concentrated. Now, food has in it vitamins and minerals and proteins and fats and starches and phytonutrients and fiber and moisture. Those are the 8 things found in foods. When you refine a food, you take out the moisture, you often remove the vitamins and minerals, and you so-called, what's it called when you put them in? Enrich. It's impoverish. So when you see an enriched food, it's not enriched, it's impoverished. And you put in substances that were never intended in the food in the first place. You break down the proteins, fats, and starches, you concentrate them or you refine them, and they become more readily broken down into sugars into your body, especially carbohydrates. So these processed sugars are highly toxic to the system and always pro-inflammatory. When people come to my office and they say, I'm in pain, and they were doing fine prior to that, my first question is, did you eat sugar? And their answer inevitably is, what do you think? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes. Inevitably, it's yes. And they look back on their diet sheepishly and they realize, oh, well, I went on vacation. Or I went to a party. Or we just had one bite of cake. Or I couldn't help myself. And I said, no problem. This is the consequence. Your choice. What do you want to experience? As Rhonda mentioned in the talk this morning, overcoming appetite is critical at this time in our existence to receive the full outpouring of the latter rain. So when we yield to diet and yield to the palate and yield to temptation of appetite, of taste, for how long does that temptation satisfy? As long as you're chewing. Once you swallow, it's all over. Then you deal with the consequence. So, processed sugars, fructose, sucrose, anything ending in ose, what it leads to ultimately is comatose. It's an easy way to remember it. So if you're seeing an ose on the end of a label in your foods, realize where it's going to go. Agave, cane sweeteners, corn sweeteners, date sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, raw sugar, blue sugar, green sugar, I don't care what it is, don't do it. It's still refined and taken out of the food. Processed honeys, malts, molasses, rice syrup, sucanat, anything that's highly concentrated and sweet. Now, we're addicted to sweet in this country. If you start avoiding sugar, after a while, you don't even like the taste of sweet. You don't want oversweet and you don't crave sweet. My body has zero tolerance for sugar, and I've always had that as a problem in my life. But I realized it in my early 20s. Well, I was super sick as a kid because we ate sugar and meat and eggs and dairy and refined carbs. I was fed that growing up and in college and at the dormitory, foods that were prepared and given to us. And when I worked out in sports, that was fed to us. And I never thought about it. I ate that, but I was weak and tired and sick. Tonsillitis, sore throats, earaches, gut problems, all the time. So I turned 21, 22, and actually I was in the Army, and I became a vegan in the Army. That was lots of fun. I made a lot of deals with the cooks. But I turned my life around and started studying about health in my early 20s. And I started reading books about natural hygiene. The natural hygiene movement came from Kellogg, which came from Sister White. But no one ever mentioned her at that time. So I started studying this work and started living this way and cleansing my body. And it worked. Tonsillitis went away, the sore throats went away, the gut problems went away. I started gaining strength and gaining energy, and my life turned around. And I was very grateful. When I started studying Spirit of Prophecy, I was most grateful to realize this was from the Lord. Do you realize that? The message was given to this denomination or this movement by God himself through a prophet. Is that significant? Oh my, absolutely. So why do we not heed that message? Why do we compromise? That's why the church is weak, because it's like the world. We eat like the world, we live like the world, we watch things like the world, we read things like the world, and we can't be sealed in the Lord. The latter rain wants to fall all around us. Even in Ellen White said, drops are already falling all around us. But how many are receiving that and receiving the early rain's outpouring, that we can actually represent Jesus with his character? White flour products. This is a huge issue. Now, it goes more than just white flour products. It also deals with gluten. Now, I test my patients for food reactivities. Almost all show reactivities to gluten. Gluten's a serious issue, found in wheat and other gluten-bearing grains, but especially wheat. Initially, wheat was only 5% gluten. Then we began to hybridize it, and it is now 50% gluten. We can't break down that density of that protein, or it's a protein carbohydrate complex. We can't break it down. And so, as a result, those undigested proteins of gluten are attacked by our immune system, saying you're a foreign protein, I have to get rid of you. The problem is those antibodies that attack gluten also attack other tissues in our body. The most common attack is the thyroid gland. You've heard of Hashimoto's disease? Anybody? It's a common problem with hypothyroidism, and it's called an autoimmune thyroiditis. Gluten is the primary trigger to that, because now the body's looking for proteins that look like gluten. Ah, there's one. It's in the thyroid gland, and there's certain enzymes in the thyroid gland that make thyroid hormone that the immune system's attacking. So you start turning the thyroid gland to scar tissue. It becomes less and less productive. There's other organs that look like that also, like the cerebellum, the base of the skull, responsible for how you find your body in space, how you know where your body is in space, how you're positioned, how you walk, how you move, how you're agile, how you're coordinated. There's other organs also that are targeted, but the downside is gluten is the trigger. And what gluten does when it's not fully broken down is it starts interrupting the tight junctions in the gut cells and breaks them apart. So now you end up with what's called a leaky gut. You ever heard of that term? Many have. And what it does now is allows undigested proteins to get into your bloodstream that now the immune system attacks. Now you create this huge war zone in the gut, and those antibodies that are formed cross the blood-brain barrier every time when you eat. Now the brain starts to go into an inflammatory state, and you want to fall asleep after you eat, or you become foggy-headed, or you can't think clearly. I had that experience myself with gluten. I finally said enough. I was tired of falling asleep with my patients in the afternoon. I said enough of this nonsense. I quit, and it stopped. Polished white rice is another sugar. Same thing with puffed grains. When you puff a grain, you now radically shift that carbohydrate to a sugar, and corn and rice are the two grains highest in fructose. So when you puff them like popcorn and rice cakes, it's now higher in sugar. And I never met more popcorn in my life than the Adventist community. I didn't know popcorn could be consumed with such quantity. That and, you put chips down and haystacks, thank you. I'd never heard of a haystack until I entered Adventism. So, but popcorn can be overdone, just to realize that. It seems to be a common practice on the weekend. But for many, sugar's a problem in popcorn. So just notice how you feel the next day. If you feel hungover or you're exhausted, consider having less. Alcohol is the most refined form of sugar. It's clearly out. And processed fruits like jams, jellies, and fruit juices are metabolized in the liver the same as alcohol. And the reason is they come into the liver uninvited. They don't require insulin. So that sugar goes straight into the liver and can start degenerating the liver into a fatty liver, just like alcohol does. So people way overdo jams, jellies, and fruit juices. So if you take a glass of apple juice or a glass of beer to your liver, it's the same. So people way overdo fruit juices and jams and jellies, your concentrated fruits. Now the whole fruit is fine. And ideally no more than you holding your hand palm down at a meal. And always eat fruits first, by the way. So they go through the stomach quickly. If you have fruits at the end of the meal, it's going to stay in the stomach too long, and guess what happens to that sugar when it stays in the stomach too long? It ferments, turns to gas and alcohol, and you get bloated and drunk on your dessert. Ask anybody what happens after Thanksgiving dinner and pumpkin pie. Now the stimulants are a big issue. They're nicotine, xanthine chemicals. They're all the same chemical family. Tobacco, coffee, sodas, power drinks, black tea, and, yes, chocolate, theobromine. So I can't recommend those at all. And one time I was driving and went to a rest stop to get gas, and I went in to get water. And I looked closely, the water said ingredients. I thought, this does not look good. So I looked at the ingredients, and the ingredient was caffeine. They caffeinated the water. Truck drivers drink caffeinated water to stay awake. I couldn't believe it. So if your water has ingredients on it, put it back. Bad fats. These fats are dangerous to the body. Processed fats like hydrogenated oils, partially hydrogenated oils, or esterified oils are trans fats, or margarine is a trans fat. The problem is this: when you make a fat into a trans fat, it makes the food you just put it in stiff, like Crisco, as an example. And that stiff fat is polarized. You break a double bond of carbon that's holding the fat together, and you rotate it, you polarize it, and you ingest that, and you have no enzyme to break that down in your body. So it stays in your body for life. It incorporates in the cell membrane, because the cell membrane is a fatty tissue, a double layer fatty tissue. And that esterified or trans fat in the cell membrane will rupture the cell membrane. So when they did research at Stanford on trans fats, they relabeled them as death oils, because they will rupture and kill the cell. You want your cells dead? Don't eat trans fats. Fried fats. Now, frying creates acrylamide, and acrylamide is a carcinogenic agent. And the damage is done in frying fats when the oil changes color or smokes. And it causes browning of the food. So be very careful with that. Animal fats, all pro-inflammatory, as we mentioned at the first point. And the industrial oils are mainly just toxic. Most of them are GMO'd heavily. Canola. Now, canola was a toxic seed from the rape seed. They couldn't call it rape oil, that wouldn't sell. So it was remanufactured and modified genetically because it made cows sick and go blind and damage their kidneys. So they modified it so we could tolerate it to some extent, and they made it Roundup ready. So when canola is grown, the canola seed, canola means Canadian oil. So it's grown in Canada, developed in Canada, relabeled as a Canadian oil instead of rapeseed oil, and sold as an oil that people should consume. What you're consuming is a lot of Roundup also, or glyphosate, which is heavily toxic to your system and can cause your own cells to start generating Roundup. Now, in the gut, that can happen. So canola is not a desirable oil. Corn oil is also genetically modified. I don't know if you're aware of it, or it's also highly toxic, but corn can be sold as organic and still be genetically modified. So you have to be very careful that it's non-GMO organic corn. Cottonseed oil is not for human consumption, and soy oils are a serious problem. When soy oils are heated, or soy itself, like soy sauce is heated, you now start generating from the protein of the soy a toxic chemical that's called a free glutamate that becomes equivalent to monosodium glutamate, damaging the brain. I'll come to that in just a moment. So I don't recommend soy oil or soy sauce or any fermented concentrate like vinegar. Even though White acknowledges that vinegar causes proteins to rot in the stomach. It's the wrong pH. So if you want proteins to rot, have vinegar. I don't encourage it, because when proteins rot, they generate gas and toxic end products, and you become auto-intoxicated from the food you just ate. The last group are called neurotoxins. Now this is a big deal. They're also called excitotoxins. These foods damage the brain. How many brains do you have? One. Do you want to preserve it or not? Well, let me rephrase that. Do you want it to be intact? You can preserve it the wrong way, like pickling, but you want it to be intact. So these things damage the brain. They guaranteed will make your brain inflamed. So preservatives and additives, and I have a little asterisk there, found also in skin, mouth, and hair care products. So if you put these substances on or in the body, it's going to be toxic to the brain. Things like propylene glycol, you know what that is? Antifreeze, yes. So don't put antifreeze in your food, or your toothpaste, or your mouthwashes, or your shampoos or conditioners. You'll absorb that or adsorb that through the skin, and it's a serious problem to the brain. Sodium lauryl sulfate is an industrial foaming agent. Toothpaste and shampoos, for example, is toxic. Go down, bromates. Bromates damage the thyroid gland, so do fluorides. Bromates are found in brominated oils and in soda pop. Look at the label. Now, what's interesting to me is when bromates were added to oils and put in the food supply, we started seeing hypothyroidism just spike, because it damages the thyroid gland. It scars it. Fluoride does the same thing. Parabens or waxes damage the brain, found in lotions and cosmetics. It also damages the breast tissue. There's waxes. So these are not desirable to put in or on your body. Also, anything GMO'd, genetically modified. Now, do you know how to tell on the label that it's genetically modified? Look just below that. You see the numbers that the produce has on it. You look at the label and you read the numbers. If there's 5 numbers starting with 9, it's going to be organic. If it's 4 numbers, it's commercial. If it's 5 numbers starting with 8, it's genetically modified. They actually have to label it. So if it's 8 with 5 numbers, don't even go there. If it's 4 numbers alone, put it down. Make sure it's 5 numbers and certified organic. Now, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, artificial colors and dyes are toxic to the brain. Heavy metals and drugs, obviously. But I want to bring your attention to artificial flavors and MSG. This is the last point. Monosodium glutamate is a brain toxin. But it's couched on labels as natural flavors, or as what are called free glutamates. So if you see yeast, for example, that says autolyzed or hydrolyzed, that's a free glutamate. It's just like MSG. And if you see these fake vegetable proteins that are texturized or are proteolyzed, like fake meats, if you see that on the label, and they're usually gluten or soy, that is a neurotoxin to your body. Worthington Foods and these kinds of things. I met the guy that actually invented these by accident. He was an engineer, and a food engineer, food science, and he was developing a slurry under pressure, and the line broke, and under pressure it started spewing all over the walls, and it stuck. He goes, huh, what is this stuff? So he realized that they could make it stick together and make it into substances like hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that, and flavor it and sell it as fake meat. The problem is it's toxic to the system. It's a neurotoxin. So great idea from a marketing perspective, terrible idea from a health perspective. So these are foods and substances that we consume that are undesirable. They will make your brain toxic. They'll damage the brain. They'll damage the gut. They'll damage your vascular system. They'll damage your health. And you want to be abstemious regarding these. Treat them as poisons, because they are. Thank you.